Imagine being so wrapped up in your own ego that you walk into a federal courtroom, facing corruption charges, surrounded by press, the public, and the full force of the law, and instead of showing even a flicker of humility, you announce that you run the entire state and the courtroom too. That was the moment David Harrison stopped being a politician and became.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
A punchline. I run this entire state, including this courtroom. You could hear jaws hit the floor, and you could see Judge Caprio sitting up there on the bench blink once, not because he was shocked, but because he had just been handed the most arrogant line in modern political history, gift-wrapped and ready to destroy a career. It was a moment so absurd, so egotistically loud, that even the court reporter probably paused typing just to make sure she heard it right. And then silence. That thick, pregnant courtroom silence that only ever shows up when someone has just said something so astronomically stupid, it changes the atmosphere. Judge Caprio leaned forward, cool, calm, almost amused. He didn't need to yell, he didn't raise his voice. All he said was, "In this courtroom, Governor, you answer to me." And just like that, boom. Contempt of court, immediate arrest, 30 days, no bail. Governor David Harrison, the most powerful man in Massachusetts, was suddenly just another defendant in a holding cell, watching his empire implode through a tiny plexiglass window. And trust me, that was only the beginning. Because this wasn't a one-line gaffe, this wasn't a bad day. This was the moment the entire country got a front-row seat to a slow-motion political car crash that had been building for years. David Harrison wasn't just corrupt, he was custom-built for scandal. For 6 years, this man played puppet master to the entire state. And I mean everything: contracts, court appointments, environmental legislation, clemency decisions, all bought, bartered, and auctioned off behind closed doors. His nickname in political circles, the broker, and not in a cute, savvy way, in a you can buy justice if you pay enough kind of way. The FBI had been following his trail for over a year, building one of the most airtight political corruption cases we've seen since the early 2000s. Wiretaps, anonymous tips, financial audits, surveillance, Harrison's entire world was being dissected while he smiled for cameras and made speeches about integrity in government. And the receipts, oh, they were thick. There were wire transfers from shell companies to political slush funds, conversations caught on tape where Harrison discussed influencing infrastructure decisions with a casualness usually reserved for lunch plans. There was even a recording of him negotiating a $4 million investment with a construction CEO, literally sitting in a restaurant discussing bribes over steak. The arrogance wasn't subtle, it was broadcasted. And still, even with the walls closing in, he thought he could spin it. He thought he could spin everything.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
But when the FBI finally made their move, arresting him at the State House, no less, Harrison treated it like political theater, walked into the courtroom like he was still on a campaign trail. Chin up, flashbulbs in the background, like the whole thing was just a nuisance that would blow over. He didn't understand that the show was over. That courtroom line, "I run this entire state, including this courtroom," wasn't just a power play. It was a delusion spoken out loud. He believed it. He thought the system couldn't touch him. That's the kind of hubris that doesn't just crash, it detonates. And boy, did it. Once the public saw him get arrested in court on live TV, the fallout was instant. Approval ratings tanked faster than you can say resignation. Political allies vanished. His party distanced themselves like he was radioactive. Protesters lined the State House with signs that read "Not above the law." Lawmakers wasted no time. Impeachment proceedings started almost immediately. Even people who had stood by him through earlier controversies couldn't save him now. Because the evidence, it was overwhelming. Over 6 years, Harrison had siphoned more than $52 million through backdoor deals and sweetheart contracts. He'd hand-picked judges who would rule in favor of his donors. He blocked environmental protections in exchange for campaign money. And yes, He was selling pardons like they were VIP tickets to a charity gala. And people were paying big. It wasn't just illegal, it was methodical. Corruption wasn't a side hustle, it was the business model. When the trial finally began, the prosecution didn't even need to grandstand. The evidence spoke louder than any courtroom drama could. Bank records, voicemail transcripts, secret recordings, whistleblower testimony. Every document another nail in the coffin. The jury didn't take long, the verdict, guilty on every single count. The sentence, 22 years in federal prison. And this time, when Harrison walked into court, there was no smirk, no camera-ready posture, just the look of a man who finally understood the only thing he actually ran was out of time. But wait, it doesn't end there. A few months into his sentence, Harrison did something no one expected. He wrote a letter. A real one, handwritten, no team, no PR polish, just him, alone in his cell facing the kind of silence that power can't protect you from. In it he wrote, "I thought my office made me immune. I thought if I controlled the narrative, the consequences would never catch up to me. I was wrong." And then the line that stuck with me. "Power convinced me that I was above the law. Prison reminded me that no one is." Now, is that true remorse, or just the final act in a lifelong performance? That's up to you. But either way, David Harrison will go down in history, not as a leader, not as a reformer, not as a symbol of hope. He'll be remembered as the man who said he ran the courtroom. And got reminded who really does. So now let's hear from you. Do you think Harrison actually learned anything? Was the letter legit or just another PR move behind bars? And what do you think the exact moment was when his fate was sealed? The steakhouse meeting, the wiretap, or that now legendary courtroom line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your hot takes, wild theories, and what you would have done scenarios. And if you loved watching this political ego crash into a legal wall at full speed, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into real-life meltdowns, and share this with someone who still thinks a title makes you untouchable. Because as we just saw, you can run the state all you want, but in the courtroom, the judge runs you. Hear what people don't understand until it's too late. When power becomes your identity, when you live for the attention, the influence, the illusion of control, losing it doesn't just sting, it shatters you. And that's exactly.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
What happened to David Harrison. Because this wasn't just about corruption, it wasn't just about a governor caught with his hands in every cookie jar in the state. This was about a man who thought he was the system, not part of it, above it. That's why he marched into that courtroom like he still owned the place. Why he looked a federal judge dead in the eye and said the words that would echo through political history. "I run this entire state, including this courtroom." The sheer delusion of it. It wasn't just arrogance, it was performance art. It was the kind of line you expect in a political thriller right before the judge slams the gavel and the protagonist realizes they've lost everything. Except this wasn't a script. This was real, on live TV, in a courtroom packed with press, feds, and the exact people Harrison used to order around with the flick of a pen. And then came the moment that snapped it all back to reality. Judge Frank Caprio, barely blinking, calmly says, "No governor in this courtroom, you answer to me." Boom. Contempt of court, 30 days in jail, effective immediately. No bail, no negotiation, no "do you know who I am" working this time. He was removed right then and there, power stripped in front of the cameras, the courtroom, and the nation. It was the sound of the myth dying. But let's be honest, Harrison's fall didn't start there. That moment was just the spark. The gas had been building for years. What we saw in court was the result of unchecked power, not the beginning of it. Because behind the polished speeches and glowing headlines, Harrison had quietly transformed the Massachusetts governor's office into a command center for one of the largest political corruption operations in recent memory. We're talking $52.7 million in dirty money over 6 years. Let me say that again, $52.7 million. And this wasn't your usual backdoor nonsense, this was systemic, industrial. There were entire teams set up to manage donation routing, which translation meant hiding bribes in campaign contributions and fake nonprofits. State contracts were being sold to the highest bidder. Judicial appointments went to people who were loyal, not qualified, and perhaps the most horrifying of all, pardons were for sale. Literal justice handed out based on bank transfers. And the craziest part, Harrison didn't just condone this, he built it. He organized it like a business, a deeply corrupt, publicly funded empire where loyalty meant profit and transparency was the enemy. You didn't speak up, you didn't ask questions, you just took the check, did your part, and pretended the whole thing was normal. And for a while it worked. Harrison was popular, he had charm, a media-trained smile, and a brilliant speechwriting team. People loved him, he was the young visionary shaking things up, the progressive hope, the reformer with a backbone. Except all that shaking, it was just money changing hands. Until the feds got involved. It started quietly, anonymous tips, one suspicious construction contract, a state-funded environmental rollback that curiously lined up with a massive donation from a waste management lobbyist. Then came the audits, the surveillance, the wiretaps. And suddenly, the whole machine was under the microscope. One particularly damning recording had Harrison openly discussing a $4 million investment with a CEO in exchange for fast-tracking a highway expansion contract. He literally called it a win-win for the public and our friends. Our friends. Sir, you are not at brunch, you are talking about bribery with a mic on. Once that evidence dropped, it was a countdown to collapse. The FBI moved in fast. His arrest was staged for maximum impact right inside the Massachusetts State House. As if to make a point, even the seat of power isn't safe from consequences. And then, of course, the courtroom incident, the moment that cemented this scandal as a generational meltdown. After that, it was open season. The press turned, allies vanished, donors.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Ghosted him. Staffers leaked everything from internal memos to burner phone numbers. And the state legislature, they did not wait. Impeachment proceedings launched that same week. The public response was nuclear, approval ratings plummeted, protests erupted on the Capitol steps. People weren't just angry, they felt played. Because Harrison didn't just abuse power, he betrayed trust. He weaponized charisma, he made people believe he stood for ethics, then quietly sold those ethics to the highest bidder. And when the trial came, there wasn't a soul in the room who could spin the narrative anymore. The evidence was exhaustive, mountains of documents, testimony from his own former aides, wiretaps, photos, financial records that traced money like breadcrumbs straight to the governor's desk. It wasn't just criminal, it was blatant. He was found guilty on every count. The judge called it a calculated, institutionalized attack on the public trust. 22 years, federal prison, no appeal would ever be strong enough to erase the stain. But wait, it doesn't stop there. Months into his sentence, Harrison sent a handwritten letter to the Boston Tribune, not through his lawyers, not edited, just him, alone in his cell, finally facing silence. In it he wrote, "I confused applause with approval. I thought a crowd's cheers meant I was doing something right, but they were just echoes in a bubble I built myself." He went on, "For too long I thought power meant control, but it actually means responsibility. I had that confused. I let people down, I let myself down." And listen, part of me wants to believe that letter was genuine. That maybe, the man who once thought he owned a courtroom finally understood he was just a guest in it. But the damage is done. Harrison will be remembered not as a leader, but as a warning. Not for what he accomplished, but for how fast it unraveled once someone said, "Enough." Because this is what happens when ego outruns accountability, when a public servant becomes a public manipulator, when someone stops thinking they're a part of the system and starts believing they are the system. So what's the moral? Simple. Power without humility is a ticking time bomb. And the gavel always drops. Here's the part that hits hardest. David Harrison didn't fall from grace overnight. No, his fall was slow, quiet, even. It was the kind of collapse that you don't notice at first because it's happening behind polished speeches and well-lit press conferences. It's happening while cameras roll and reporters nod, while voters applaud and opponents hold back, unsure whether what they're seeing is charisma or just very expensive smoke and mirrors. And when you look back on it now, it's all so obvious. Every red flag was waving in plain sight. The unusually fast contract approvals, the hush-hush late-night fundraisers, the sudden reversal on environmental protections after a cozy dinner with oil lobbyists. It was all there, every warning, every clue. But when a politician looks like a hero, talks like a savior, and raises millions for your party, people look the other way. Until he walks into a courtroom and says the quiet part way too loud. I run this entire state, including this courtroom. There it is again, the line that stopped time. The moment Harrison turned his entire legacy into a cautionary meme. The courtroom didn't even need to react dramatically. Judge Caprio didn't shout, no one threw gavels. He just said, in this courtroom you answer to me. That's when everything finally snapped. Not just for Harrison but for the public, for the system, for everyone watching who had quietly wondered for years if maybe, just maybe, the man in charge had gone too far. Now they had their answer. And the consequences, instant. Contempt of court, arrest, a 30-day jail sentence.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Right there. It was like watching a balloon pop in slow motion. And from that point on, the David Harrison illusion didn't just unravel, it evaporated. Supporters ghosted, colleagues denied ever trusting him, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle raced to file impeachment motions like it was a competition. He was political toxic waste, nobody wanted to touch it. And as the trial loomed, the floodgates opened. Investigators revealed Harrison's corruption wasn't just frequent, it was structured. It had layers, whole offices within the state house that essentially functioned as bribery clearinghouses. One former aide described the administration as a vending machine. You put in enough money and you get a favor. Need a state contract, pay up. Want a pardon, hope your check doesn't bounce. Need a judge appointed, only if your name is already on his donor list. It was so grotesquely organized that it stopped feeling like politics and started feeling like racketeering with a side of ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But what made it worse was the betrayal. Because Harrison didn't get elected by promising chaos, he promised the opposite. He ran on integrity, transparency, reform. He told voters he would clean up Beacon Hill, that he would restore public faith in government. And then he turned around and sold that very faith for profit. Every handshake, every speech, every vow fake. So when the trial ended and the sentence came down, 22 years in federal prison, it wasn't just justice. It was the closing act of a long-running lie. And still he tried to salvage it. He released that handwritten letter. A carefully penned, sobering reflection from prison. I let the pressure convince me that power justified everything, that as long as the machine worked the cost didn't matter, but it did, and it always will. He called his actions a tragedy of arrogance. He said he thought he could outrun accountability. He couldn't. Now, depending on who you ask, that letter was either a genuine moment of clarity or just one last attempt to control the narrative. But here's the truth, no matter how you spin it. David Harrison is no longer a governor, he's a reminder. A warning. He's the textbook definition of what happens when someone believes they are above the system, above the law, above the very people they swore to serve. Because you can wear the title, you can enjoy the power, you can sit in the tallest office in the state. But the courtroom doesn't care who you think you are. The judge doesn't bow to polls, the jury doesn't answer to donors. And the gavel always comes down. Now I want to hear what you think. Was that courtroom moment the most satisfying political mic drop you've ever seen? Do you think Harrison meant a word of that letter, or was it just the final act of a man who thought performance could save him? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want all your hot takes, deep dives, and what I would have done if I were the judge fantasies. And if you loved watching a political house of cards collapse in real time, hit that like button, subscribe for more chaos-fueled storytelling, and share this with someone who still believes power makes you untouchable. Because as David Harrison learned the hard way, the courtroom is where delusions go to die.